Recorder. All right, so hello. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Marcela Alves. I'm going to be the moderator for today's webinar on software-driven social license to operate. Before we start, this section is going to be recorded. So if you have any problem, please leave a message on private for me on the chat. And also passing some house rules before this webinar. Everybody's going to be muted all the time. So if you have any questions or comments, please leave me in the chat. I'll make sure I pass it over to the team. And also here, I'm going to be welcoming Chris and William, which are going to lead the talk today. Thank you. And Will, hello.
Hi there, Marcela, and thank you very much for the introduction. I should just say that I won't be leading any conversations when I'm in the presence of someone with as much experience as Chris. Rather, I'm here to enjoy selfishly the conversation and to help facilitate the conversation too. It's a very exciting and very zeitgeist topic that we have today. And so before anything, I wanted to say good afternoon, Chris, and thank you for joining.
Very welcome. It's very good to be here. As you know, I never miss an opportunity to talk about our software. So very much looking forward to today's chat.
Perfect. And that might be a good place to start. Myself, I probably know a little bit about you, but I recognize those of us joining from Australia, Singapore, and the US might not. And so maybe you could let us know a little bit about who you are and what is Clockworks.
Sure thing. I guess first and foremost, I'm a professional software engineer. I've been working in the field for over 35 years, perhaps 40 years by now. And over the years, I've built everything from smart card-based systems to smart card-based operating systems, payment systems, risk management systems, workflow management systems, automation systems, integration systems. Built all sorts of software. The Clockworks company, or the Clockworks initiative, came out of a need we had 10 or 15 years ago to have a piece of software that helped us manage our various businesses. At the time, we had an organization that they worked in property development. We had a resource consultancy. We had a training business, and each of them had a unique set of requirements over how we approached doing business within them. And so it was important for us to have a piece of software that had solid workflow, good project management capabilities, an ability to manage all of our contacts and all of our relationships with our customers, something that automated some of the more mundane tasks, and something that allowed us to draw data in from the other applications that we're using. And so those many years ago, the initial version of the Clockworks software was born. Around 6 years ago, we decided to start commercializing the software, start looking at helping other people as we helped ourselves. So we started packaging the software as something a little bit more commercialized, and went out looking for clients. Now, initially, we found an opportunity to help with the Simandou project for Rio Tinto. They had a need to better manage the permit applications that they were applying for through government. Because it was all happening in Guinea, the government wasn't particularly effective in dealing with the permit requests. The local team wasn't keeping on top of things. They were using tools like Excel to manage the information they had. We knew that we could do something better. So we took our software and created a version for them of the or at least a version of it that helped deal with permit management. As part of that, we noticed numerous problems in the way the projects were being managed. And so because the permit management system needed us to also be aware of terms and conditions that existed within the permits, we started logging requirements, actions, commitments that people were making to conform to the terms of the permits. And in doing that, we started looking at all manner of obligations that might exist within the project. In fact, we looked at the initial contracts that existed, and we looked at all of the promises and commitments that were made. And we started work on allowing them to automate and track the commitments and obligations. And hence the obligation management system was born. We were able to deliver to them a system that allowed them to break down all of the contractual, legal, moral, ethical obligations that had been agreed to as part of the negotiation for the project that they were working on, and then track them through delivery and maintenance.
Okay, well, it's very timely, I think, for organizations, software houses, and solution providers to be reorientating themselves or helping those of us in extractive and mining industries to solve some of our major challenges. If we look at it from the top, we see a tremendous amount of change in our industry. We have, as we come out of COVID, a tremendous amount of pent-up demand. We have historically low interest rates. We have carbon reduction measures that are driving demand for certain types of metals. There's effectively talk of the next super cycle, the fourth in the last 100 years. On the other hand, as organizations look to understand how they can contribute and benefit from this super cycle, on the other hand, we see the rise of ESG, or environment, social and governmental considerations, being one of the most significant issues for governmental partner, indeed all stakeholder groups. So whereas I understand why those of us from a mining background are thinking a lot about some of these problems, it'd be very interesting to understand specifically how Clockworks helps organizations build, strengthen, and then maintain their social license to operate, which is ultimately going to be crucial if they're going to capitalize in this next super cycle.
Well, first and foremost, we believe that great companies do what they say they're going to do. They enter into agreements with local governments or countries or other organizations, and they make promises along the way that they're going to do certain things. And so we think that it should be easy for them to do those things. And likewise, it should be easy for them to collect along the way evidence that they have done those things. Now, you mentioned some of the social license issues. Now, very often, issues with social licensing are played out in the press. Somebody becomes aware that something negative has happened. There may have been actions that were taken by the company to mitigate against that kind of risk. But because nobody is really aware of what was being done, companies don't have the right story to tell. They don't have the information at their disposal to be able to deal with the issue when it occurred. And so I think key to being able to provide good answers to questions about what they're doing, about the promises that they make, is to keep track along the way, to relate all of the activities back to the commitments, the obligations that they made as part of negotiating the contracts that they entered into. And we believe that we can do a lot to help with that. We believe that we can do a lot to help break down and identify those commitments, and then identify the risks of meeting or not meeting, tracking mitigating actions against those risks to make sure that they can do what they need to do, to develop plans and then to track those plans, and really along the way just make sure that things get done. Likewise, I think key to delivering on a set of promises to make sure that everybody understands what those promises were, and why they were made. Likewise, in accomplishing any task that involves activities, work, people have to understand exactly how to approach what they're doing, and they need to understand what they need to do. I think employees or people working on projects genuinely want to do a good job. They want to deliver on the commitments that the company's made. And our software has a lot of functionality that really helps make that happen. There are, of course, approaches to doing this. We see a lot of companies using tools like Excel, because it's quite flexible in creating lists of things to do and lists of tasks. But in large and complicated projects, Excel doesn't scale particularly well. It doesn't share particularly well. It's not particularly adaptable. It doesn't help people keep on the straight and narrow.
I would agree. I have worked on many projects where we have perhaps abused Excel spreadsheet and taking it to its limit. So I can certainly see a case for implementing software that helps you monitor the obligations within an organization. But perhaps I can ask a simple question, and apologies for having to ask it. Maybe I should have looked before I agreed to come today. What is the difference between obligation management and compliance? A lot of what we're talking about today, I think of as a compliance issue. Perhaps you could help clarify those terms.
Well, most compliance systems manage the laws, the legality of doing things, and they ensure that people do things in a proper legal way within whatever region they happen to operate in. Now, compliance systems work great where those rules and regulations are extremely well defined, where people can draw upon governmental regulations that are properly documented and available to everyone. They don't often cover the moral or ethical or even the corporate obligations that might come with negotiating a deal or doing work in another country. And so our system is quite flexible in the kinds of obligations. Of course, we deal with legal obligations, and of course we can log and register legal compliance regulations and ensure that people remain compliant against those regulations. But we also look at the softer, the fuzzier commitments that are made along the way. Now, another way that we're different is that the system is quite flexible in how it's configured to deal with different sorts of obligations. I mean, there is, as I noted, more than one type, but there's also more than one approach to dealing with them. And when you're operating in a regime where the rules and regulations are, let's say, a little bit fuzzier, a little less clear, a little more subject to interpretation, then you often have to take very, very different approaches to complying with what you've said that you were going to do, or complying with those regulations when you're dealing with different departments. And so as a result, the workflows that we implement are really quite flexible and easily configured to adapt to rapid changing situations where something might need to be done one way one week. It might, in fact, need to be done another way the next week. And we can react to that kind of change very, very quickly, very, very easily.
Okay, so many of the mining firms have operations in different parts of the world, indeed teams all over the world. There are, of course, a lot of similarities across them, but a ton of differences too. On the one hand, we might have Australia, Canada, the US as examples of regions or countries where regulation is increasing, certainly, but is relatively clear and consistent. That isn't the case for some of the operations or some of the regions in which mining companies are currently operating. Think about Africa, think about South America, where things are more in a state of flux. So what you're saying is that your approach, your Clockworks' approach to social license to operate takes into account all of these regional differences, but still gives you a joined up view. Is that right?
Yeah, that's precisely it. What's really important when dealing with bureaucracies that are a little less clear is that you're able to adapt the processes that are used by your people to actually allow you to rapidly get from point A to point B. You need to be able to actually deliver to the officials what they need to see, what they need to have, to actually give you the licenses that you need to progress. You also need to be dealing with people in different ways. And so the approaches are always very, very different. So that means the information you need to collect is very different in each case. And as noted before, the processes that you follow in each case are very, very different. Now, very often there are specific reports that perhaps have to be filled out and submitted. And our system has an extremely flexible report generation capability where any of the data that exists within the system can be compiled and then fed into a report in one or more languages. Of course, language is also a challenge in dealing with governments and people in different areas, and especially a challenge for large companies that perhaps have part of their workforce working in France, another part working in Australia, and all of them working on a project somewhere in Africa, where you have 3 or 4 different cultures involved, you have 3 or 4 different languages involved, and you have to be able to provide updates to each of them in a way that they can properly understand. And so multilingual is very important. And again, a report generation capability is very important to just make sure information flows as it needs to flow.
I understand. Okay. Well, certainly. And I guess one of the challenges then is the different types of risks organizations face in those different regions are going to be different. So your approach and your platform has, does it have additional tools that help organizations manage these things as a project? Does it have a risk register? How do you help organizations more widely? What makes you different?
Yeah, well, you're right. It's not enough just to log a set of obligations and then track what's being done along the way. You actually have to help people get this work done. And so rather than being a tracking tool where we collect information and then provide people access to it, we provide very, very good tools for helping people keep on the path. And as a result, we have exceptional project management tools built into it. Any of the tasks or activities that are entered into the system can be tracked on Gantt charts. We can use Scrum boards, Kanban processes for dealing with work that needs to be done on a daily or weekly basis. We have a work planning facility built into it where people can build out work plans for their teams to help them actually achieve the objectives that have been set for them. The project management capabilities have resource allocation built in, so we can keep track of the time that it takes people to do various tasks and assign estimates to the tasks that need to be accomplished. We track baselines for project plans, so it's very much a full project management system alongside the obligation management system. Likewise, as you mentioned, there's a complete risk register, and we have configurable means by which we can determine risks. For one project, you might have 3 or 4 criteria that allows you to calculate a risk, where we can track those criteria and then use those to automatically determine the risk of something happening. Risks are aggregated within the system, so if a risk is connected to something else that is also a risk, and that affects the overall risk of something happening, we, within the risk management system, can keep track of both the risk of something happening, but also mitigating actions that might need to be taken. We track audit logs. We know and can track everything that everyone does at any given time, so people can go back and see why things were done. We have mechanisms such as escalations, both automated and manual, where if things aren't being done, the appropriate people can be made aware very quickly that they're not being done. People can define reminders to help them remember that things need to be done, and those reminders can be interconnected with tools like Google Calendar and Microsoft Outlook.
Now, speaking about reminders, I perhaps should have set myself one to ask Marcella if there have been any questions from our audience. Marcella, my apologies for perhaps not allowing you to speak. Marcella?
Yeah, no worries at all. Actually, we have one question here that I would like to pass it over. So the question is, we using Borealis for stakeholder management. Does your system provide stakeholder management capabilities too?
Yeah, it does. And in fact, in our case, it's a I guess, a more generalized mechanism that allows us to keep track of contacts or people within the system. And we can then associate data with those people, so that when you're looking at those contact records, or those person records, or those stakeholder records, in the case of Borealis, you can see the activities, the obligations, the actions, the documents, any form of data that relates to those people in the context of those people. So if you happen to be dealing with somebody or talking with somebody, you can automatically see all of the information that relates to that person, so that you can either pass that information on or use that information to communicate the way you need to communicate.
Understand. It's a very complex environment with some very high stakes. It requires a pretty powerful piece of software to help us deliver on that. And I suppose two of the predominant themes in certainly in software procurement, in systems thinking at the moment, is around data protection on the one hand, and then helping managers stay on top of things, right? So how do we make sense of signals through all that noise? Two different questions, but how does Clockworks then deal with data protection? Question one, and I suppose question two, unfairly put together. How do we help managers and senior and decision makers pick up signals through all the noise? One of the risks is that there's obviously a lot going on with these types of platforms.
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot to your question. So first of all, about data and data protection. Within our system, you define entities, the trackable entities that you want to manage. Now, in the case of obligations, one of those trackable entities might be the obligation itself. Another might be an audit that you need to conduct. Another might be a simple task of various types. Now, all of these things have data associated with them, and that data relates to the task, but doesn't necessarily need to be seen or consumed by everyone. In fact, one of the mistakes of legacy systems is you try to present too much data to people. And I think if people presented with too much data, too much information, they kind of data paralysis, where they don't know what to do given all the information at their disposal. And so where we define workflows that involve the entities that we create, we make sure that people can see the information that they need to see and are allowed to see, given the state of the entity as it works through the workflow. Right? So it means that everyone doesn't need to see everything. They just need to see what they need to see to actually do the thing that they need to do at a specific point. Likewise, system fully GDPR compliant. So we have everything held securely. Everything is identifiable, and anything and everything can be removed if somebody requests. Now, you also mentioned what the system does to help keep people on the straight and narrow, and helps keep people be productive. So there are a number of capabilities that help with that. First, we have a lot of automation built into the system. The system can generate documents on its own. It can move tasks forward on its own. It can connect to external systems to pick up triggers from those external systems to then track actions or activities that maybe need to follow that. For example, we quite frequently connect the system to field monitors to monitor data coming in from the field, where that information might relate to a commitment or obligation that's been made within the system, and then allow users to be able to identify the source of a trigger or warning that's come in, and perhaps map it in some way. In fact, everything in the system is ultimately geolocatable, and so everything in the system can be plotted on a map. And I guess that's also part of the answer to your question about how we make it simple. When we configure an instance of a system, we make sure that We provide operational statistics and dashboards to people that kind of cook down the data that exists throughout the system and presents it in an easily consumed way, in a way that's easy to understand, normally quite graphically, where we show exactly what's going on and what progress is being made in a particular area. Now, that's only the start. I was talking about some of our project management capabilities, but the system also includes capabilities for dealing with things like document management. The system integrates an enterprise-grade document management system that's capable of dealing with billions of documents and then relating those to either the tasks or the activities that people are following. It has integrated chat ops where people can discuss, and those discussions again logged against the activities that are taking place, so that people can share information and communicate with each other in the context of the tasks that they're attempting to complete. Process management, we have a process management facility that allows us to define higher level tasks that can be integrated into the workflows that we're following. We have question and answer threads where knowledge can be, or questions can be entered into the system and then answers logged and retained for future use. We have an integrated help desk and a help desk ticketing system that allows people to request help in various areas, so a help team can get on with assisting them. So really, there are just a massive number of capabilities in the system that help keep things moving.
Okay, well, certainly I understand a little bit more about that, the capability of Clockworks. And at this point, then it might be worth us taking a step back to the business challenge. And it'd be really interesting to hear from your point of view, someone who's worked on a number of different projects, as we've already discussed. What are the main challenges that so many of these organizations that you work with, what are the main challenges that they're facing when it comes to adhering to maintaining and strengthening their social license to operate? Sorry,
before Chris just answer, we're reaching the 30 minutes, just like a friendly reminder.
Okay, thanks very much.
Marcella, we appreciate it. We get passionate and we forget. I thought it'd only been 5 minutes. So please.
Time has passed very quickly, yes. Okay, some of the challenges. Well, of course, one of the big challenges is avoiding mistakes. People are human, they make mistakes. So it's important to have something in behind the work that people are doing to provide checks and balances against things going wrong. For example, the system with its geolocation capabilities can keep track of what's happening where within the system. If there are actions taking place or activities that are planned, those can all be geolocated. Now, if it happens that a geolocated activity clashes with a region or area that's protected, the system can generate a warning and let people know that something's going on. So notifications and warnings based on some kind of monitoring of what's going on is really important. Again, you need those checks and balances. You need something behind what you're doing to make sure things don't go astray. Likewise, it's all well and good to collect these notifications and warnings, and all well and good to have something that reminds people that things need to be done. But often, for whatever reason, there's often conflicting priorities, people don't get around to doing what they need to do when they need to do it. And so there it's important to be able to, as you say, remind people, but also to be able to escalate issues where things aren't happening as they should. And the system contains 2 or 3 different kinds of escalations that allow tasks that are overdue to be escalated to a manager or a manager's manager or a manager's manager's manager, either within the context of a project or within the context of the system or organization as a whole. Another way a system can help is really just by keeping everyone up to date with what's going on. I think with the issues we've had with COVID, especially, and the continued drive to work in a more dispersed, isolated fashion, you need something that really can bind people together and keep them working together on achieving their objectives. And key to that is to have something that supports active communications, right? You need something that will let people know what's going on, when it's going on. You need something that will allow people to interact and communicate in a way that's both auditable and trackable, and in the context of a problem. Because of course, the systems like chat and Slack are all well and good, but the problem is that the information kind of gets away from you. It starts to become buried in amongst a gazillion chats about random things. And so if you ever have to go back and try to figure out exactly why a decision was made over one of these channels, you can't find it. And it's the noise that exists within a chat system. Now, as we use an integrated chat system, we also integrate, like we do document management, an enterprise-grade chat system. So we help keep those conversations that might happen in tools like Slack or Rocket Chat or Mattermost or Microsoft Teams in the context of the work that's actually being done. Project management, we mentioned as being important. Additionally important are the dashboards. I think, again, you want to have, when trying to communicate to people what needs to be done, a way to consolidate that the information that exists and all the things that's happening into something much more high level, something more graphical. And there we have a number of mechanisms where we can provide high level analytics to people so that they can get a top level view of what's going on and a top level view of where things are going wrong. Does that answer your question?
Certainly does. And I think different things can go wrong at the different stages of a mining life cycle. Many mining organizations measure their, have a planning horizon of 10, 15, 20, 30 plus years. And so at what point then do you think organizations and folks should start to think about social license to operate in the systems that underpin it? I guess what I'm trying to get at is where and when does Clockworks fit in?
Well, of course, the earlier the better. We have functionality in the system that will actually help people both negotiate and track work being done on the agreements that are put in place. So if obligations or commitments or the conditions of agreements are logged very early on, then we can provide a way for people to discuss and to manipulate, adjust, and finally agree upon the terms and conditions that go into those final agreements. Now, the system is interesting in that it doesn't just have one workflow that might be associated with something that might be trackable, like an obligation. Multiple workflows can be associated with it, depending on the phase. So you might have one workflow that is associated with an obligation that's important to make sure things get done properly in an organized way at the beginning, at first negotiation, when you're developing the contracts and agreements. Then you might have another workflow that is tied to that particular obligation that occurs during the planning phase, when people are actually trying to figure out how to accomplish everything that might be in the agreements. Those obligations still play a part, but they will be used differently when trying to determine how to actually deliver. Then in implementation, there can be another kind of workflow associated with these things. They can be included in the work that's being done to implement. I mentioned earlier on a case where the obligations, again, or conditions that might exist might have an effect or might be imposed as a result of permits being achieved to actually do work. And where you've got a large dispersed contracted workforce who are taking responsibility for doing work involving permits that have been issued, and there are multiple terms and conditions associated with those permits, you need to make sure that those people understand, and then you need to make sure that they are doing the work to ensure compliance, and that you're doing things to actually audit against those terms and conditions that have been defined that go alongside the permits. So again, a different way to manage those obligations at different points. And of course, you need to have high level visibility of these things. And so after you've built out the project, after you've implemented and the project is active, you need to make sure that you remain compliant against these. But then again, that's a different kind of workflow and a different kind of process that might be required to adhere to those obligations. And then, of course, finally, closure. Once the work is done and the facility needs to be closed down, there may be yet another approach that's taken to dealing with those obligations, and a new set of plans set about to actually deal with shutting everything down. Yeah, so it's important that the flows that people follow to deliver on what needs to be done is different and specific to a phase of operation for a project.
I understand. Perfect. Well, that certainly gives me a better idea of where Clockworks fits in, when it fits in, and what it can actually do to help organizations achieve their social, maintain and strengthen their social license to operate. But that's what I think. I don't know what any of our guests on the call today think, and so I pass the ball back to Marcella. Marcella, any interesting questions on your side?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the participation. We have many questions in the chat, but the time doesn't allow us to answer many of them. So I just picked up one, but we're going to be addressing them after the webinar separately and in a conversation. But the question is, the challenge we have is that every region has its own process and approach. Okay, local teams are effective with their tools they have, and our problem is getting a view over what's going on at any given time. Is there any BI only capability in your platform, or do we need to opt out for a full-blown implementation?
Yeah, no, in fact, we have three ways to approach business intelligence. The first is quite straightforward. The system will generate charts, graphs, gauges of various sorts based on queries that can be defined by people within the system itself. And those charts and graphs can be embedded within dashboards that are specific to a worker's role, or in fact, even configurable by a user. That's the most basic form. Secondarily, we quite often need to encode very specific KPIs for our customers, where we need more complex visualizations, and we have 150 odd different kinds of visualizations we can draw from within the system, where we produce a bespoke widget that can display information in a very specific or very bespoke way. Now, these are really required where the amount of data or the types of data that need to be consolidated to produce the graphic are beyond someone's ability to actually configure. Now, a third way, if you do want to use an analytics tool like Grafana or Kibana or one of the other dozen analytics tools, everything that we collect within the system that's input either by the users or is collected from other systems that might be around Clockworks can be mirrored out to a business intelligence system. So it allows us to compile from the very early part of the project a data warehouse of information for all of the things that are going on. And then those more generic tools can be used to analyze that data. And then, of course, we can take those charts and graphs that have been generated by the external tool, and we can incorporate those back into the dashboards that we produce. So again, three ways. You can either use the capabilities that we have, you can use the system to develop a data warehouse and then use an external tool, or we can help by developing specialized KPIs based on our libraries of pre-built widgets to display things in a more customized way.
Perfect. Thank you very much. A very thorough answer to a very interesting question. Now we have come to the top of our agreed and allotted time. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. People have got meetings to get back to. So it is worth once again saying thank you to Chris for joining. Thank you to those of us who are joining us from the US in the morning, Europe in the middle afternoon, and much later in the evening as we move eastwards from here. So thank you again. I am aware that Clockworks and Christopher Carrick are very keen to carry on the conversation afterwards. And with that, I pass the ball back to Marcella.
All right, thank you. Thank everyone for joining once again. We're going to follow up with the recording from the webinar. And thank you. Thank you for joining. Goodbye.
Excellent. Thank you.